Hello, welcome to the Midnight Bible Study. Many years ago, I was a workaholic. Some things never change, I guess, but I was a workaholic, and I was working in an office, uh, and I had this need to. I just could. I needed a break. I needed to get out and get some fresh air. So I knew I needed gas. So I went to the gas station, and while I was there, I saw this girl pumping gas next to me with a beautiful smile, and I told her she had a beautiful smile, and I ended up talking to her, and we gosh I don't know what happened. We talked. I think I found out where she worked, and vice versa, and pretty much that was it. We said goodbye, and that was that. Well, over time, she we got in touch through, she had told her sister that we had met, and then they, sisters knew someone who worked at the same office I did, and basically we ended up going on a date, and ended up, like, that was, I guess we've been married 30 years now, something like that, at least close to that long. And so, I think it's pretty clear that when I had to get out of the office that day, because she also had a similar situation, she just needed to get out of the office too, and so she went to the gas station to get gas. I went to the gas station to get gas. That's how it happened. So anyway, we're going to talk today about 7 signs God is guiding you in exterior ways, circumstantial ways. So one of the ways that God guides us is a word from others. Sometimes God will guide us. Someone will speak their mind to us, and oftentimes we don't like it. So there's a story of Nathan in the Bible confronting David. What happened is David was king, very powerful man with everything, but he had seen this beautiful woman, and Bathsheba, and he wanted her, but she was married to David's general. I believe it was his general, one of his soldiers. May have been just a regular soldier. I have to double check on that. But anyway, one of his soldiers, this was his wife, and David said, she was a beauty. So he seduced her. I don't know what happened was he goes, you know what? I want her. And so, but I've got this problem called the husband. So he said, all right, let's send that guy to the front, where he had a very short life expectancy, almost like a soldier in the Ukraine under the NATO leadership. So he sent Uriah, the soldier, to the front lines, and he died promptly. And then now David had nothing standing between him and Bathsheba, so he ended up marrying her. And then this was an evil thing he had done. And Nathan, the prophet Nathan, had come to him and told David a story about a powerful man who had essentially robbed a poor man and taken everything, including his most precious possessions. And the story outraged David because it was obviously the rich man was so ruthless, not realizing that this was actually describing him. It was sort of like a parable, and David didn't quite immediately realize that this story was about him. So ultimately, God gave David insight through a word from others, a word from Nathan, who had the guts to confront the king about his sin. Another exterior sign that God is guiding you is through divine providence. Now, this is fascinating. Divine providence. You meet people who encourage you and support you. That's one way through divine providence, we could meet like a mentor, or someone who encourages us or opens doors for us. For example, in the Bible, we have the story of Jesus. he called out the 12 apostles, and he said, you're fishermen, but come with me and you'll be fishers of men. And so that was divine providence in the life of those apostles. And then we have the priests of the temple who mentored and raised Josiah, the future king of Israel. This boy had no parent, no father. The priests raised him because they had him hidden for years in the temple, because if he wasn't hidden, then he likely would have been assassinated, because he had the bloodline to be a future king. So they kept him hidden, and they raised him as a righteous young law-abiding boy. And these priests, they mentored him and raised him, and that turned out to be divine providence that led to him becoming the king of Israel at the right time. It's all in God's timing. So sometimes divine providence looks like coincidence. Like, oh wow, that was a coincidence. What a crazy coincidence. We see this. I'll bet you've had that happen before. I certainly have. And you find yourself in the right place at the right time. A couple examples from the Bible. Joseph was in Egypt at the right time to save the people of Israel, to save the Jewish nation, the people of Israel. He was there after being. It's crazy events that landed him there. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slave. He ended up a servant of the king. He was framed by the queen, lied about, thrown into prison. Then he got out of prison by interpreting dreams, and ended up being, like, through this crazy sequence of events, he ends up prime minister of Egypt, the second most powerful man in Egypt. And he's in that position. He's able to save the Jews during a famine. So, it looks like all these coincidences, but this is actually through divine providence that this is happening. Queen Esther was in the right place at the right time to save the nation of Israel as well. She was the queen. She was married to the king, and so she was able to use her position in order to fight the enemies of Israel, who were trying to literally genocide. She was able to stop genocide of her people. So she just happened to be in the right place at the right time. If she wouldn't have been there, that could have been it. But she was there through divine providence at the right time. Here's another example. It's kind of a crazy story of coincidence or divine providence. So imagine, this is a crazy story. I'm just going to tell you what happened here. This priest had this priest. He's like, part of the wall of his. It wasn't a priest. It was a pastor. Part of the wall of his church was falling off. Like, it left a big gaping hole in the wall. And so he was at some kind of a sale. I don't know if it was a garage sale or something like this. Some kind of I think it was an auction, actually. He was at an auction. Nobody wanted this big tablecloth, and it was a nice tablecloth, and nobody was wanting it. So he goes, you know what? I could use that tablecloth. I'll use it I'll hang it over that hole in the wall in my church. So he buys it for $6. He was the only bidder, and he hangs it up, and it looked very nice. He put it over the hole and it covered up the hole in the wall. And then he was, on a rainy day, he was out in front of his church, and there was a woman out there who was, like, standing in the rain at the bus stop, and the bus wasn't scheduled to come for some time, like a half an hour. So he invites her in. He goes, why don't you come in, at least stay dry and wait for the bus in here. So she comes in, she sits in the pews and is praying, and then she goes, she notices that tablecloth. And she goes over and takes a look at it. And she says, you know what, this tablecloth reminds me of a tablecloth that used to be mine. And then she looked where she had written her name on the tablecloth that she used to own many years ago. And she saw her name there. It was her. By coincidence, she had been invited in to this church to stay out of the rain, and this tablecloth that was covering this gaping hole, which by coincidence had, at that time caused the wall to fall out. And it was the very tablecloth that she had bought years ago. In fact, she hadn't bought it. Her husband had given it to her as a wedding gift. And he says, "Oh, well, you can have it." And she goes, "No, I don't want it anymore. What I really need is a job, because, I'm new in town." And so he talked to her a little more, and she had just been at an interview with some people, but she hadn't gotten the job. But anyway, so she went on her way. And the next day in church, after the church, a guy comes up and he goes, "Hey, that tablecloth is very nice. In fact, that reminds me of the one I bought my wife after we were married." And the priest is going, "Really?" So they look at it, and he goes, he sees the name and goes, "Yeah, that's her." So they got in touch with the family who she had interviewed for a job and got her address, and then he went and found. See, what I didn't tell you is that somehow they had gotten lost touch during World War II. She thought he was dead. She thought her husband was actually deceased, and I can't recall why he thought she was dead, but he thought she had died too. So they both didn't even realize the other ones were even alive. And through this series of coincidences, they had been brought together in this church, and they ended up being remarried. Or actually, they had never been divorced, so they actually just, they got back together again. Crazy story. You can call it coincidence, or you can say that's divine providence. Crazy story. All right, number 3, unusual providential circumstances. Serendipity is an example of unusual providential circumstances, and how God can guide us through exterior signs, like serendipity. For example, there's an old story about the princes of Serendip, and these princes were adventurers. They would travel around the world looking for treasures, and they would never find the treasures that they were looking for. But they'd end up finding all these different treasures that they weren't looking for. And there's something very realistic about that in terms of how our lives go. A lot of times we go out looking for one thing and we don't find it, but we find something else that's equal or better. So, serendipity. Another example of unusual providential circumstances is Moses in the burning bush. That's the story, of course, where Moses sees the burning bush out in the wilderness, and it turns out this is a sign from God, and God essentially recruits him to go back and lead the Jewish nation out of Egypt in the Great Exodus. And then another example of unusual providential circumstances is unexpected blessings. There actually are some brother. Anyway, I forgot the names, but I've read about some one guy who owned some orphanages. There's another guy who had owned a Christian school, and these guys they would pray a lot, but they would get unexpected blessings through people sending them checks that they hadn't answered for, and it would save either the orphanage or it would save the college through these unexpected blessings. All right, next way that God would bless, the next way that kind of exterior sign that shows that God is guiding you is unexpected pruning in our life. Sometimes, I have some grapes, and in the springtime I prune them back. I cut those branches back in the winter, actually, late in the winter. And when you do that, they grow, they just flourish more, and it's healthy for them. But it looks like it hurts because you're cutting all these branches. People do this to trees also. And God prunes us. We're like, we're sort of God is the vine and we're the branches, so we get pruned. For example, doors can close. Maybe we have something in our career or in some area of our life, we could have doors slam in our face. Things that we're working out don't work anymore. And or we suffer losses, or we face adversity or failure. Or there's a story in the Bible where the prophet's creek dries up. He's been staying in this one area, but his creek dries up. I believe that was Elijah. The creek dries up, and he went off, and he went off and found a new source of supply. Another example: after conquering Jericho, the Israelites attacked a small village. I mean, this was a colossus, a military superpower. But they went to attack this sleepy village. They did it they took it for granted. They didn't have any plan. They just sent out a detachment to take over this village. They didn't wait for guidance from God or prayer or anything. No, just go do this. They took it totally for granted. They ended up taking heavy losses and being humiliated. And they learned some lessons about not just taking reckless actions as opposed to getting wisdom from God and making good decisions. Failure is often a stepping stone to success. So, you could look at Moses, who in his impulsive nature, Moses wanting to save the people of Israel, his own people, because he was part of the Pharaoh's family through adoption, but he was secretly a Jew. And so when he saw the way they were abusing the slaves, Moses decided he was going to take action, and he did it through murder, killing a soldier who was abusive. And unfortunately, Moses, through this action, made himself a wanted man. He had to flee into the wilderness, where he spent 40 years essentially as a fugitive before he saw that burning bush. You look at Peter. Peter, the first apostle, or the first pope. Peter was the one who denied Christ 3 times as the rooster crowed 3 times, which had to have hurt Jesus to be denied by Peter, but also how humiliating for him to have done that. But Jesus went on to promote him and as the first pope, and made Peter the first pope of the Catholic Church. So Jonah, you look at the story of Jonah and the well. Jonah was essentially a failure. He was fleeing from doing his duty, and as a result, he ended up being thrown overboard when his this curse he brought with him brought this storm. So they threw him overboard. He ends up in the belly of a whale, but he was spit out, and he realized his error at this point, and he ended up going on and being a success. Paul was a persecutor of Christians, and that would have to qualify as a failure, but he went on to be perhaps one of the greatest apostles. I'll show you something here. The Raft of Medusa is a famous painting. I'll show you with this. If you're not familiar with this painting, I'll give you a look at it. This is it. So this is a great shipwreck story. And the Raft of Medusa. And that's a disaster for sure. Everybody, people die, ships are lost, fortunes are lost. Paul was shipwrecked on Malta, on the island of Malta. And this led to a sort of miracle that confirmed scriptures and made a very fascinating Bible story. Here it is. It goes, this comes from Acts 28:5. Once safely ashore, we found that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess of justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul, he shook off the snake, he shook it into the fire, and he suffered no ill effects from this deadly snake. So this actually confirms other scriptures and shows it's a miracle. All right, so another exterior sign that God is guiding you. Confirmation from various sources. This could be dreams, visions, scriptural confirmations. There's a story of a pope. This is an incredible story. Saint Agatho, which was the pope in the year 700. And what happened was a terrible pestilence broke out in Rome. And great numbers of people died. And then with the same violence, the disease depopulated Ticinus, which is Pavia, forcing all residents to flee. Some to the mountains, others. Well, there were piazzas in the streets. Then many people saw with their own eyes the good and the evil angel roaming the city at night. So there was these people. There was this pestilence, this sort of like a plague. People were dying all over the place. And it says, then many people saw with their own eyes the good and the evil angel roaming the city at night. So people saw a good and an evil angel together roaming the city at night. And every time that a sign from the good angel and the evil angel struck with a stick he had in his hand at the door of a house, with the next day the person that therein died. That was the good angel who did that. So I don't know what that would say about the people in that house, why the good angel would knock on their door and essentially give them the death mark. What the reasoning, what kind of punishment that might have been. So finally, thanks to prophecy, it became known that the plague would soon stop as soon as an altar to Saint Sebastian the Martyr would be raised in the Basilica of St. Peter in Chains. So there was this prophecy, of course, that they have to raise this altar in this church to St. Peter of Chains, and the altar is to Saint Sebastian. And so it happened. The remains of the saint brought from Rome were placed in the altar of that basilica, and the plague vanished. The plague went away. So crazy things happening. Confirmations from exterior sources, which could be sightings of angels or prophecies, as it turns out. Okay, so the seventh exterior sign that God is guiding you: unanswered prayers. Sometimes we pray for things and we get no answer. And that can happen for different reasons. Maybe we were praying for the wrong reasons. We were disobedient. We're asking outside of the will of God. Even a man's prayers might not be answered if he's been mistreating his wife. According to 1 Peter 3:7, husbands in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. So there you go. All right, something to keep in mind. All right, answering the prayer God, if God is going to answer our prayer and it's going to lead us toward disaster or lead us astray, He's not going to answer it, quite probably. That's a reason God might not answer. We think it's good, but we don't realize that might lead us toward disaster. Paul's thorn in the flesh made him, God didn't answer his prayer to take it away, but this led him to become more dependent on God and the grace of God, which ultimately deepened his faith and served God's purposes. Father, thank you, Father. I want to pray for you now. Pray now, Father. Thank you for the understanding you've brought through your word regarding the signs, the exterior signs of God's guidance in our lives. Thank you for opening doors for us. Thank you for the closed doors, which could otherwise lead me astray. Lead us astray. Help us to recognize your leadings. Please send confirmations to help us to listen to you. Help us to know your voice, Lord. Help us to recognize when you're trying to get our attention. Thank you, Father, for your guidance in our life. Amen. Thank you for watching, and God bless you. Good night from the Midnight Bible Study.